My name is Maya. And at that moment, walking down the aisle toward Mark, I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. The sun smiled down on us, its golden rays sparkling through the canopy of leaves overhead. Mark looked striking in his well-tailored tuxedo, and his eyes met mine with the promise of a lifetime of happiness. "Wow, you look incredible," he whispered as I reached him at the altar, his voice tinged with awe. "Thank you, love," I replied softly, my cheeks warm. As we exchanged our vows, his voice was steady, but I could feel the tremble in his hands. I had always admired his sensitivity, his openness, his willingness to show his emotions. I thought it was an attribute, not a liability. But as I glanced over Mark's shoulder, I saw Margaret and Peter, his parents, standing close by. They were smiling, yes, but there was something in their eyes, an intensity almost as if they were inspecting me. As we said, our idos and the audience erupted into applause. Margaret approached us. "Oh, what a beautiful ceremony! Mia, you're officially a part of our family now," she gushed, pulling us both into a hug that felt more possessive than welcoming. "Thank you, Margaret," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm glad it all went smoothly." Peter joined us, patting Mark on the back in a way that seemed both congratulatory and cautionary. "You've done well, son," he said. "Just remember, family is everything, always." "Of course, Dad," Mark responded, his eyes dropping for a second. The reception was a beautiful affair, full of laughter, toasts, and dancing. But amidst the celebration, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to the familial closeness Mark's parents displayed. They consulted him on everything during the reception, from the timing of the toasts to the selection of the music. Even the honeymoon was a subject of their input, with Margaret not so subtly suggesting a list of family-friendly destinations. I found it strange, but shrugged it off, attributing it to wedding, day jitters, and the general high emotion of such a significant event. After all, we were starting a new chapter of our lives. Perhaps they were just having a hard time letting go. But as we waved goodbye to our guests and departed for our honeymoon, a destination we chose, not Margaret, I couldn't help but feel that the strings attached to my new husband reached further and pulled tighter than I had ever imagined. Still, I chose to focus on our love, our future, and the life we were about to build together. It was our picture, perfect wedding, and I wanted to believe it would lead to a picture, perfect life. Mark turned to me as we drove off, away from the crowd and into the horizon painted by the evening sun. "Are you happy, Maya?" "More than I've ever been," I replied. And in that moment, it was the truth. A truth that, I would later discover, was based on a tapestry of illusions and deceits that would unravel, thread by thread, until all that remained was the stark, painful reality of a life not as it seemed. But for now, the future was a blank canvas, and I was ready to paint it with all the colors of love and joy I had in me. How naive I was to think that was all it would take. The first few months after our wedding were nothing short of heavenly. We settled into married life like two pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Mark was a devoted husband, and I couldn't be happier. We both had good jobs, and the transition from fiancés to spouses felt seamless. But as the autumn leaves began to fall, signaling the shift of another season, our lives took a turn for the worse. Mark came home one evening with his shoulders slumped and a pallor that looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Hey, you're home early. Is everything all right?" I asked, concerned by his demeanor. He looked up, avoiding eye contact. We sat on the couch, the tension palpable. "I got laid off today," he finally said, his voice breaking a little. "Oh, Mark, I'm so sorry," I responded, hugging him tightly. "What happened?" "Restructuring, they said. My position isn't essential anymore," he replied, air quoting the last word. While I felt deeply sympathetic, I was confident he'd find another job soon. Mark was talented, with years of experience. But as the weeks went by, something changed. He was no longer the driven person I knew. He started to withdraw, passing his days binge, watching TV shows, or mindlessly scrolling through his phone. "Have you started looking for new jobs yet?" I gently asked. "Yeah, I've been looking," he'd reply vaguely, never meeting my eyes. But what really troubled me was the increasing involvement of Mark's parents in our lives during this period. They would call him every day, discussing long-term plans, giving unsolicited advice, and even offering to set him up with interviews for jobs he had no interest in. Margaret called again. She knows someone at her friend's company that's hiring. Mark mentioned one day. "Do you want to work there?" I asked, a tinge of skepticism in my voice. "Not really, but maybe I should just take it." "No, Mark. You should find something you'll be happy doing," I advised. He looked at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. I don't know if I have the luxury to think about happiness right now. And then came the visits. Unannounced, Margaret and Peter would show up on weekends, filling our home with their overbearing presence. I felt cornered even in my own house, a house that had once belonged to my parents, who had passed away years ago. This $1.03 million property was my sanctuary, my inheritance, but it started to feel more like a stage for Margaret and Peter to perform their familial obligations. "Mark, why don't you show us your plans for job hunting?" Peter would command more than ask, setting up an atmosphere that felt like a corporate review meeting, not a family gathering. The man I had married was slowly becoming unrecognizable. His voice lost its assuredness, his posture its confidence, and the strings his parents had tied around him tightened with each passing day. They seemed to consider our house their second home, doling out advice, and acting as if they had more right to the space than I did. It was then that I realized the illusion of our perfect life had cracks that were widening into fissures that threatened to break us apart. I couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was terribly wrong, and if I didn't act soon, I feared the man I loved would be lost, consumed by a life dictated by others. But little did I know, that was just the tip of the iceberg. There were darker secrets, betrayals that would question the very foundation of our marriage. And as the winter chill started to creep in, so did the cold reality of my life with Mark. By the time winter rolled around, the vibrant energy that had once filled our home had turned stagnant. Mark seemed lost in a perpetual fog, and the man I'd married, the man who had once filled my life with laughter and joy, was slipping away from me. He'd come home late most nights, stumbling through the door with the stench of alcohol following him like a second shadow. "Where were you?" I'd ask, keeping my voice steady despite the rising concern. "Just out with the guys. Needed to blow off some steam," he'd respond, evading my eyes as he headed for the liquor cabinet. The nights his parents visited were equally distressing, but in a different way. Margaret and Peter seemed to have perfected the art of passive, aggressive comments and backhanded compliments. "Maya, this pasta is wonderful. It's almost as good as what Mark used to eat back home," Margaret would say, her words dripping with insincerity. "Thanks, Margaret. I try my best," I'd reply, grinding my teeth into a smile. I was at the end of my rope, overwhelmed by a husband who was retreating further into his shell and in-laws who seemed hell-bent on accelerating that process. I had to do something, anything, to salvage the remnants of our crumbling marriage. So I hired a private investigator. "Mrs. Roberts, I need to know everything. Where he goes, who he meets, what he does. I can't continue living like this," I told the detective, my voice tinged with desperation. "I understand, ma'am. You'll have all the information you seek," he assured me. Within a week, the investigator came back with a report that felt like a sledgehammer to my chest. "He's been seeing someone," the detective told me, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were pictures of Mark at various bars and restaurants, always with the same woman. "And that's not all," he continued. "He's been making frequent visits to a storage facility. I couldn't gain access, but it's certainly suspicious." My mind was racing, grappling with a reality I never thought possible. Mark was having an affair. But what about the storage facility? What could possibly be there? I was still digesting this information when Mark staggered through the door one evening, drunker than I'd ever seen him. "Mia, we need to talk," he slurred, stumbling into the living room. "What is it?" I asked, my stomach knotting with dread. "My parents think it's best if we transfer the house to them. They believe it's the wise thing to do, given my job situation," he said. So, this was it. The final act in a play I never auditioned for. But unlike Mark, I had found my voice, and I wasn't afraid to use it. "Mark, not only am I not transferring the house, but I also know your mistress," I shot back, my words sharp and clear. The color drained from his face. "Whoa, what are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," I said, seething with anger and betrayal. "I hired an investigator. I've seen the pictures, Mark." He looked shattered, his eyes widening in disbelief. "Mia, Save it! I can't do this anymore," I cut him off. "I'll be filing for divorce." As he sank into the couch, utterly defeated, I felt a strange mixture of relief and anguish. The man I loved had betrayed me, but in doing so, he had freed me from the illusion of a perfect life, from a marriage governed by deceit and manipulation. It was a painful awakening, but an awakening nonetheless. I picked up my phone and dialed my attorney's number. It was time to close this chapter and begin a new one, on my terms. And so, as the winter snow began to fall, blanketing the world in its cold embrace, I felt the first flicker of warmth in months. It was the warmth of empowerment, of taking back control. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. I was the author of my own story, and this was just the beginning. As the days crept on after that fateful confrontation, an eerie silence fell over our household. Mark seemed to oscillate between regret and stubborn defiance. We barely spoke, our interactions limited to essential conversations about household chores and bills. But while he was seemingly lost in his maze of emotions and deceits, I was busy plotting my next moves with surgical precision. My lawyer was a shark, keen and focused, exactly what I needed for what was about to come. We pored over every document, every piece of evidence that could solidify my case. I had built a fortress of facts, invulnerable to the manipulations Mark and his family were so adept at. Just when I thought I was geared up for battle, Mark approached me one evening. He looked serious, sober for the first time in weeks. "Maya, can we talk?" he asked, his voice shaky. "I'm listening," I responded, my eyes meeting his. "I know I've messed up. Really messed up," he began, "but I don't think giving up on our marriage is the solution." "You think keeping it is?" I retorted, my patience wearing thin. "I've been thinking, what if we give it another try? Go to couples therapy, try to understand where we went wrong." The sincerity in his eyes was almost convincing, but I knew better. I had danced to the tune of his manipulations for too long to be swayed now. "And what about your parents?" I inquired. "Will they also be joining us in therapy?" He sighed, running his hands through his hair. "Look, I'll talk to them. Set boundaries." I almost laughed. Boundaries? Mark, do you even know what that word means? He looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "I can learn." "It's too late for that," I stated, closing the chapter once and for all. "Tomorrow, I'm filing for divorce. You'll be served the papers." He was silent for a moment, grappling with the finality of my words. What if I don't sign them? I leaned in, locking eyes with him. "Then we'll go to court. And believe me, Mark, you won't like what comes next." It was an ultimatum, crystal clear and non-negotiable. I had given him the choice, even though I knew he was cornered. The evidence I had would decimate him in court, not just on the grounds of adultery, but also financial negligence and more. I had managed to gather evidence of unauthorized withdrawals from our joint accounts, possibly linked to his late-night escapades and the mysterious storage facility. Mark looked at me, his eyes searching for some sign of leniency, a hint of the love that had once bound us together. But all he saw was resolve. My mind was made up. There would be no going back, no rewriting the chapters of betrayal and deceit that had filled the recent pages of our lives. Finally, he spoke. "I never thought it would come to this." "Neither did I said, my voice tinged with sadness and finality. "But here we are." As he walked away, defeated and broken, I realized that the man who left the room was a stranger to me. How we had come to this point was a labyrinth of choices and consequences, one that I no longer had the desire to navigate. I picked up my phone, texting my lawyer that we would proceed as planned. As I set it down, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders, as if I had shed the layers of someone else's mistakes and emerged anew. Yes, the battle was far from over, but for the first time in months, I was in control. And as I braced myself for what lay ahead, I knew that whatever the outcome, I would come out stronger on the other side. Because unlike Mark, I had faced my ultimatum head-on, and I was ready for the fallout, come what may. Days turned into weeks as I awaited our court date. The anticipation was a slow burn, but I had too much to do to let anxiety get the better of me. With every document submitted and every consultation with my lawyer, I was reclaiming a piece of myself that had been buried under years of deception and manipulation. Finally, the day arrived. I stepped into the courthouse, dressed in a suit that was as sharp and unyielding as my resolve. Mark was already there, looking disheveled and anxious. His lawyer seemed competent, but had that air of arrogance I knew would crumble under the weight of our evidence. The proceedings began, and it didn't take long for me to realize that Mark had underestimated me, something he had done throughout our marriage, but would regret today. "Mrs. Roberts, is it true that you and your husband jointly own the house you currently reside in?" The opposing counsel started. "Yes, it's true," I replied calmly. "And yet you insist on keeping this $1.03 million property all to yourself?" "I don't insist. I assert my rights based on the evidence of adultery and financial misconduct." I shot back, leaving no room for debate. Mark's lawyer chuckled condescendingly. "Ah, the adultery claim. Yet can you confirm that your husband was also facing extreme stress due to his unemployment?" Stress is hardly an excuse for betrayal, I retorted, refusing to let them victimize Mark for his own mistakes. As the session dragged on, it became evident that Mark's counsel was grasping at straws. When they tried to argue that my hiring of a private investigator was an invasion of privacy, my lawyer immediately countered, citing the justification for the investigation: Mark's erratic behavior, late-night absences, and suspicious financial activity. Finally, Mark was called to the stand. He looked nervous, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. "Mr. Roberts, did you or did you not engage in an extramarital affair during your unemployment?" my lawyer inquired. I did," he mumbled, almost inaudibly. "And did you or did you not make unauthorized withdrawals from your joint account with Mrs. Roberts?" He hesitated, then admitted, "Yes, I did." That was the turning point. In that moment, Mark's castle of lies crumbled into dust, swept away by the wind of truth. The judge had heard enough. We recessed and awaited the verdict. A few hours later, we were called back into the courtroom. The tension was palpable, but I felt a sense of serenity wash over me. I had fought my battle, armed with truth and justice, and now it was out of my hands. The judge began, after reviewing the evidence and testimonies. "It's clear that Mr. Roberts has not only committed adultery, but has also been financially irresponsible in a way that negatively impacts the marital estate. Therefore, the request for divorce is granted in favor of Mrs. Roberts, with no division of property." It was over. I had won, not just the house or the divorce, but my own self-respect and dignity. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt lighter than I had in months, maybe even years. Mark followed me, his eyes swollen, perhaps with regret or the sudden realization of the magnitude of his actions. "Mia, can we talk?" "There's nothing left to say," I responded, finally closing the door on a chapter of my life that had caused me nothing but pain. As I stepped outside, the sun seemed to shine a little brighter, as if acknowledging my newfound freedom. I was on my own now, but for the first time in a long time. That thought filled me with excitement rather than dread. The court decision was a monumental victory, but it was just the first battle in a war I knew was far from over. My lawyer had cautioned me that Mark might try to appeal, or worse, drag me into other legal complications. To stay ahead, we spent the following weeks taking steps to secure my assets and fortify my legal defenses. Then came the phone call that I hadn't anticipated. It was from Mark's sister, Sarah. "Maya, I know we haven't always been on the best terms, but can we meet? There's something I need to tell you," she spoke softly, an unusual tone for her. Curiosity piqued. We agreed to meet at a neutral location, a quiet cafe downtown. As I sat across from her, she looked uneasy, but there was an earnestness in her eyes that I couldn't ignore. "Listen, Mia," she began. "I've had a long talk with Mark. He's completely shattered by the divorce and the court ruling. He's also started attending therapy." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "That's supposed to change things." "No, it's not," she admitted. "But I've seen a side of him that's genuinely remorseful. He knows he's ruined the best thing that ever happened to him." For a moment, a pang of the love I once had for Mark flickered within me, but it was quickly extinguished by the memories of his betrayals. "Sarah, even if Mark is genuinely remorseful, it doesn't erase the past or make him trustworthy. He made his choices, and now he has to live with the consequences." Sarah sighed, as if she'd expected this response. "I know, and that's not why I asked you to come here. Look, Mark's therapy sessions have been making him revisit his relationship with our parents as well, and he's making strides to stand up to them, to assert his independence." I almost laughed. "A bit too late, don't you think?" "Yes, it's late, but better late than never," she paused, her gaze meeting mine. "Mark has decided to sever financial ties with our parents, and he's in the process of finding a job. He's trying, Maya." I looked at her, my thoughts racing. Could Mark really change? Even if he did, would I ever be able to trust him again? "Why are you telling me all this, Sarah?" "Because family means something to me, even if our family has been far from perfect. Mark made mistakes, terrible ones, but he's my brother, and you were a part of this family too. Mia, I just thought you should know." She looked down, almost regretfully, before standing up. "Whatever you decide to do with this information is up to you." As I drove back home, Sarah's words echoed in my head. I felt a complexity of emotions. Relief, confusion, but mostly a renewed sense of closure. Mark was finally growing up, but it was too late for us. His choices had shattered something irrevocable. However, his journey towards betterment didn't need to include me. When I reached home, my lawyer called to confirm that all post-divorce legal procedures were complete. The house was officially mine, and Mark had no avenue left for appeal.